This is A Word, a podcast from Slate. I'm your host, Jason Johnson. A young black man is falsely accused of rape by a young white woman. He's confident that he'll be exonerated right up until the time he's pronounced guilty. It sounds like a movie of the week, but it was the real-life nightmare of Jarrett Adams.
My experience with the law was Law and Order. And at the end of that theme music, you never saw someone who was wrongfully convicted at the end of that theme music not get justice before the next commercial ended.
Fighting for freedom after a wrongful conviction. Coming up on A Word with me, Jason Johnson. Stay with us.
We all have that friend who wakes up early to go get everyone McDonald's breakfast, while the rest of us sleep in. This is your sign to thank them. And if you're that friend, this is us saying thank you.
Just a friendly reminder that right now, get any size iced coffee before 11 a.m. for just 99 cents. And a satisfying sausage McMuffin with egg is just $2.79. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer or combo meal.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Can you set the stage a little bit so people understand what happened?
In 1969, 14 black student athletes were kicked off their university's American football team for planning a show of support against racism.
We were really protesting our treatment on the field.
Amazing Sports Stories from the BBC World Service tells their story.
We became brothers that day when he did that to us.
We made a change.
Fighting for what we deserve.
Search for Amazing Sports Stories wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Welcome to A Word, a podcast about race and politics and everything else. I'm your host, Jason Johnson. The criminal justice system is notorious for racial bias, and few people know that better than attorney Jarrett Adams. At the age of 17, he had just graduated from high school when a teenage mistake landed him in the criminal justice system, facing decades in prison. He was accused and convicted of rape for what was later acknowledged to be a consensual encounter. After the shock of his conviction, Adams' life changed forever. As a teen locked up in adult prisons, he struggled through more than 8 years of incarceration, including long stretches in solitary confinement. But it was this ordeal that led to his crash course in the American justice system, which would ultimately lead to his exoneration and legal career. Jarrett Adams is now a defense attorney. He released his memoir, Redeeming Justice, back in 2021. And Adams is also the co-founder of Life After Justice, a nonprofit that helps the wrongfully convicted win their freedom and rebuild their lives. He joins us now. Jarrett Adams, welcome to A Word.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate this platform to share my story.
We're going to get into your personal story, which is amazing, in a moment. But let's talk a little bit about Life After Justice. What is your organization's mission, and what do you all actually do?
Thank you for asking and starting with that. So I think that right now, the public and your listeners are aware that wrongful convictions happen, that there is the process to overturning wrongful convictions. And at the point that the cameras stop recording and flashing the pictures of jovial moments, exonerees like myself are faced with putting their lives back together pretty much on their own. I think it's a misconception to believe that everyone who is harmed wrongfully by this system is somehow compensated millions of dollars. It just doesn't happen, in most cases, and it didn't happen in my case. So when I came home to a stable foundation in that my mom, my aunts were all, working, believed in therapy and mental health care and healing. And they made sure, it wasn't an option for me. They made sure that I was able to get access to therapy and be able to heal, which allowed me to put the pieces of my life back together in order to be able to accomplish these goals of going off and going to law school and becoming an attorney. So when I thought about what helped me so much, I wanted to recreate that. And in doing it, I, along with another exoneree, founded Life After Justice. And Life After Justice does just that. 3 things. We work on cases of actual innocence, and we also work on legislation because there are certain things in our law that allows for the probability of someone being wrongfully convicted to happen a lot higher than other circumstances. So our last bucket is the mental health care piece. I believe this, and whether it be someone reentering back into society or someone overcoming a bad ordeal in their life, if life were a marathon, you could not even start the race without making sure that you had the proper footwear and it was on and it was tied. This mental health care in this bucket that we offer is that making sure that you have the proper footwear to deal with the rest of that marathon of life. And unlike a real marathon where you have smooth trailing, the road to putting one's life back together is filled with a bunch of hurdles, potholes. And in order to do that and have a chance successfully, that's where the mental health care and decompression of what happened to you is so important and vital.
Your story is the personal nightmare of every Black man in America, every parent of a Black son. Tell us a little bit about your story. What was your life like before, and then what happened to you?
I mean, I was just a kid on the south side of Chicago. You know, I was the last of a great group of grandkids, you know, to my grandfather and grandmother. And so they gave me special attention. And what I mean by special attention was somebody was always at the house. Someone always knew where I was or where I was supposed to be. And so there was really no chance to get wrapped up in the streets and in a lot of things that I saw my friends and other kids as well on the south side of Chicago get wrapped up in. But at the same time, Jason, this is an impoverished neighborhood that I'm growing up in, living in. So all the over policing that happens in my community happens across the country. And that's what my area was. And so me and my friends, we were all, you know, high school or had graduated high school, and we would go to parties outside of our neighborhood because it just was so rough. I mean, it's no different than what it is right now. You don't have to be doing anything wrong for something wrong to happen to you. So we do what we did several different times and nothing ever happened, which was we all get in the car, we go to a college party, we tell each other's parents we're spending the night over their house, and we stop at the Waffle House 5:30 in the morning. We get back to each other's houses at 7 a.m. Great college, you know, all-nighter is what we used to call it, right? In this particular case, after a consensual encounter, we were falsely accused of a sexual assault by a young white college student. But the horrible tragedy of it was that not only was it undermined from the very beginning, but the authorities had the police report from a young man who was literally the saving grace to us all to be able to see our movements from the time we got to this college campus party to the time we left. And instead of turning that over, they withheld it. And it cost me 10 years of my life until I was able to retrieve it, the statement that was withheld, and my conviction was unanimously reversed and record expunged.
After you were arrested, and even when you were on trial, you were pretty confident that you were going to be found innocent. Why was that? And what was the difference between, say, like your expectations and that of your mom or your dad or your grandma or somebody?
It was totally different. In writing the book, Life After Justice, I spent a very good deal of time about the family setting, because I think the misnomer is that even if you're innocent, people who get themselves in situations like this, they had to be doing something wrong, or they had to come from a wrong background, or they just had to be no good, or whatever it is. So I spent a lot of time talking about that because aunts in the church raised me in a church. No criminal record before this happened. So you're talking about people who were mistaken to believe that the justice system was designed to protect and was going to protect us. My experience with the law was Law and Order, you know, and at the end of that theme music, you never saw someone who was wrongfully convicted at the end of that theme music not get justice before the next commercial ended. And so my mom and my aunts were terrified. Now, these are strong Black women, and I never seen fear etched on their foreheads like I saw while I was going through this. Meanwhile, I wasn't afraid because I naively believed that I didn't do anything. We didn't do anything. So therefore, nothing wrong would happen. But my mom was terrified because they came from down south. They had the stories of my grandfather sneaking them out of the cotton fields when slavery was supposed to have ended. And he snuck his kids out one by one in Chicago to get them out of the sharecropping, right? And so they knew and they expected the worst. I, raised in this cocoon on the South Side, barely went downtown, barely went out of the city. So all I knew was just stay out of the way of trouble, stay out of the way of gangs and drugs, and everything else will be fine. Graduate from high school. Done that, and I wasn't fine. And I just don't think it was taught enough in our schools, in our life lessons. And me and my family were victim of it when we sat there at the trial and we trusted in our court-appointed attorney, and we should not have.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, more on Life After Justice with co-founder Jarrett Adams. This is A Word with Jason Johnson. Stay tuned. This is Jason Johnson, host of A Word, Slate's podcast about race and politics and everything else. I want to take a moment to welcome our new listeners. If you've discovered A Word and like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. And let us know what you think by writing us at aword@slate.com. Thank you.
We all have that friend who wakes up early to go get everyone McDonald's breakfast while the rest of us sleep in. This is your sign to thank them. And if you're that friend, this is us saying thank you.
Just a friendly reminder that right now, get any size iced coffee before 11 a.m. for just 99 cents. And a satisfying sausage McMuffin with egg is just $2.79. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer or combo meal.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Can you set the stage a little bit so people understand what happened?
In 1969, 14 black student athletes were kicked off their university's American football team for planning a show of support against racism.
We were really protesting our treatment on the field.
Amazing Sports Stories from the BBC World Service tells their story.
We became brothers that day when you did that to us.
We made a change.
Fighting for what we deserve.
Search for Amazing Sports Stories wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
You're listening to A Word with Jason Johnson. Today, we're talking about life after justice with attorney Jarrett Adams. Before the break, we were talking about your trial. There were two other young men who were accused with you. And I understand that you and one other guy went to jail, but one went free. What led, because you said you didn't have that exonerating document, what led to those different convictions and those different outcomes?
Like I said, I think that for those who want to dig deep into it, you got to read the book because the book takes you through the journey of how it happened. But in an elevator pitch type of way, I'll explain. Me and my co-defendant who went to prison, our family just couldn't afford an attorney. We didn't have money. Our one co-defendant, his family did have money and they were able to put up their house and they hired this attorney. His attorney filed motion after motion after motion based on how race was being used as elements to get a jury to convict us. And their trial ended up being severed. And it was when the trial was severed and after we were found guilty where I started to write letters and understand more about what happened. And I remember writing a letter to my co-defendant who had yet to go to trial. It was his attorney who sent an investigator out who located the witness who said, look, I told them everything I knew. I wrote a 3-page statement. That's when we uncovered the 3-page statement. And the court, get this, the prosecutor had the opportunity right then and there. I had only been incarcerated for 8 months when we had discovered what had happened, and my co-defendant's charges were dismissed. They dismissed the charges against my co-defendant who had yet to go to trial, but they told us that they were not going to agree to reverse our conviction because our attorneys decided not to call witnesses, so it didn't matter anyway about the statement. So yeah, Jason, they made me go through 7.5 more years in prison appealing only for the Seventh Circuit to unanimously agree and reverse the conviction, which they could have did 7.5 years ago.
You maintained your innocence at pretty much every point throughout this trial, even after your conviction, and that cost you. What happened and what did it teach you about the legal system that you were still standing on your rights and standing on your innocence? What did that teach you?
The lesson was a stark reality that the legal system has a how dare you, response to Black men when they are standing on their afforded constitutional rights. How dare you tell this court that you're innocent and that you didn't do it when an all-white jury who was not of your peers found you guilty? How dare you still say you're innocent? I did do that. I did dare to stand on that. And I did it not because I was being defiant. I did it because I had 4 Black women behind me who knew how they raised me. And I felt so bad and I disappointed that I disappointed them. And so at that moment when I was being sentenced, I stood up and I said, look, I didn't do this. Despite what this jury, who was not my peer, said, I am not guilty. I was raised by women, know how to respect women. And I will not allow what this jury decided without all the evidence. I would not allow their perception to become my reality. As a result of that, I was initially sentenced to 20 years, and the judge told me that she felt the need to give me an additional 8 more years because I wasn't remorseful. And that 8 years put me from a medium level to a maximum/super maximum security level, where I went to start off doing my time with people who were in prison with 25 years to life.
Tell me a little bit about your legal education once you were incarcerated, because there's an image that a lot of people on the outside have of some prison library where there's some kindly old man who shows you the books or something else like that. I don't know what that's really like. What was it like in your spare time? Did you get library passes? Did you ask for a job in the library? Were there counselors or attorneys who came to you and said, hey, look up this book, this book, this book? What did you learn? And what was that legal education like while you're still incarcerated?
It's not designed for you to be successful and have the tools you need. It's just not. The criminal system is designed after conviction to preserve the conviction no matter what. And that is what I experienced. I did have a cellmate who encouraged me to stop playing basketball and chess and fight for my life because he had never seen a case such as mine where someone would be sentenced to 28 years. He would oftentimes point out to me, that guy you was playing basketball with, he shot 3 people, killed 1. He got 20 years. How do you get 28 years? And so I started to go to the law library, and I also became a tutor in the law library to have access to it. I would look up the newspaper, see different attorneys who were successful at cases, write them a letter. And I, was able to get the attention of an attorney named Rob Hennick, who helped and assist me get my filing together, which ultimately got the attention of the Innocence Project, who would come on and take over my case and exonerate me.
Even as you were getting yourself cleared, like you said, the justice system, like all institutions, is all about reinforcing whatever decisions have been made, whether it's right or wrong. They're like, nah, you're in jail. We want to make sure, because quite frankly, it exposes all the corruption that led to the ultimate decision that was going on anyway. Talk about the actual, some of the price of this process. Like, how much did this cost, from the cost of your appeals to the shoes you wore when you walked out of prison? How much does this take out of your pocket, your family's pocket, everybody's pocket?
It is entirely set up to stress and strain the family, the support system, and isolate you so that you're doing this battle on your own. My mom went through her 401k, trying to get appellate attorneys. It led to the sneaking behind my stepfather's back when she's spending her savings and retirement on trying to get help for me. Even when my conviction was reversed, there's no date when your case is going to be reversed. I had no other choice but to walk out with the boots, state issued boots. And when I got a check of what was left on my commissary, they charged me money for those state issued boots. And I got a check for about $34 mailed to me afterwards. So, when I tell you that the depictions of people who go in and out of prison and how they're highlighted on its negative points are intentionally designed to further segregate the predominantly Black and brown men who reside there from their base of support. And I hate to say it, but it's become easily digestible for us as a society to look at people who are locked up or people who do the perp walk in handcuffs, to not ask what were they accused of. We ask, what did they do? And so when I think about that, and I think about the toll where you just asked me, it wasn't just a monetary toll. There was the emotional and physical toll. The tentacles of a wrongful conviction, or any conviction, reaches a person lifelong. And I'll give you an example of that. I get out. My mom has a get together for me. I'm literally being introduced to my niece and my nephews because they don't know who I am. I've been gone for almost a decade. And we get together, we're laughing, we're joking, we're going through photo albums. And here I am, pre-K, kindergarten, prom. My pictures stop right after prom. And they don't start again until almost a decade later.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, more about life after justice with attorney Jarrett Adams. This is A Word with Jason Johnson. Stay tuned. I've got a special message for our listeners in Canada. It's about a show that I think you should listen to, Canada Land. Every week, Canada Land's journalists bring you news and conversations that honestly can be hard to find these days. With rigorous reporting and thoughtful analysis, their episodes bring you into the most important conversations from across the country. From a radical form of reconciliation emerging in Saskatchewan to in-depth debates and gun rights and the rise of fascism, Canada Land's stories will surprise you and make you think. Try Canada Land today and find out why Canadian news doesn't have to sound like Canadian news. Search Canada Land in your podcast app. You're listening to A Word with Jason Johnson. Today, we're talking about finding justice for the wrongly convicted with exoneree and defense attorney Jarrett Adams. When I hear about and when I read about cases like yours, and, I've seen this, I've known this, they pop up in the news, right? They pop up in the news from time to time. Sometimes we hear the after stories, sometimes we don't. I always think about all the different kinds of people that have enraged me in the process. The dirty cop, the lazy attorney, the corrupt attorney, the person that lied, the roommate of the person that lied who kind of knew the whole time but didn't really say anything and then put it on Facebook 8 years later. Who do you hold the most responsible for your incarceration? And has that changed over time? Like, as you look at it now, you're like, you know what? This person was just doing their job. I can't help that they were lazy, but this person really is the one who took 8 years from my life.
I mean, well, that answer has evolved, right? When I initially got locked up as a kid, I would answer that question and say, it's the system that is doing what it's been doing since its inception, which is not considering people of color that it incarcerated in our backgrounds. Like, I'll give you an example. When bond was created, right? When people were talking about the system and how people would be released on bond, they came up with an idea where they said, if you don't have money, then just use chattel, right? Well, I mean, how many black people, brown people own their homes, right? How many black and brown people have access to some type of collateral or funding, which is why we've always been on the short end of the stick when it comes to bond issues, right? Because we're just not able to afford it. When you look at that, the numbers say that people who aren't able to afford to get out on a bond are, they have greater chances of being convicted, not because they're guilty, but because they don't have access to preparing their defense like anyone else would if they were released. And so, to answer that question, I thought, look, this is his design. As a kid going into the system, this is his design. They're doing this on purpose. It's the legal system. It's the judges. It's the prosecutors. It's the police. Well, now going through what I went through and now practicing. So I did almost 10 years. I've been practicing for almost 10 years. I'll tell you what the biggest issue is. The biggest issue is that the minorities and the minority groups in which this system is choking the life out of have not found a way to humble themselves and work together. Because if the minorities and its groups and its supporting groups would link up, we would no longer be the minority. We would be the majority, and we would be able to have effect and great impact. The problem is that our egos and who has somehow become the barometer for who has access to justice. My conversation may be a little bit too real and raw for your favorite old school abbreviated group. But let me tell you, some of the best coaches in the game were once what, Jason? Players. So when you look at these organizations who are designed to tackle, dismantle, restructure this legal system, for it not to have a Jarrett Adams or someone to help with that change, it's a mistake. And it's part of the reason why we created Life After Justice and now are working on partnerships. There's a lot that directly impacted people have to offer, but you can't simply just have someone around. They need to be at the table to be able to help make impactful decisions.
As someone who did do real time, a lot of times after that, people don't want to go back to it. That is a forgotten part of their life. What made you decide to not leave this behind? What made you decide to say, yeah, your parents loved you and yeah, your family supported you, but what made you say, no, I'm going to make this my life's work as opposed to I'm going to throw some cash at it or maybe just give some speeches?
When I got to prison, everyone was calling me youngster, young Chicago, stuff like that. And the reason why is because I was 18 getting ready to turn 19. And the population of the prison was predominantly people in their late 20s, mid 30s, 40s, stuff like that, right? And so as I started to matriculate through the years, by the time I was leaving out, the prison was predominantly young Black Jarrett Adams when I first came in. I was incarcerated during the prison boom from 1998 to 2007. And when I'm looking at this, and I had a nephew who was born, while I was locked up, and I'm looking at it, and it was terrifying. I had a niece who was also born. And I remember I used to play basketball with these couple guys, and everybody in prison has a nickname or you're going to get a nickname, okay? And I'm playing with these guys, and I had been playing with these guys for a couple months, and they were referring to each other as G-Son, Old Man, and Pops. And I'm thinking, look, they must all be of one gang or something like that, right? You know what I mean? It wasn't until I had got on a visit, my mom had come to see me. Those three were on a visit. And that's when I realized that was the grandfather, father, and grandson. And they were in there for drugs, different drug cases, but they made it to the same maximum security prison. And when people ask me, what did I see in prison or witness that was one of the worst things ever, they think I'm going to respond and tell them a violent attack. I tell them this story that I'm telling you. The couple ladies who came and saw them had a toddler in each hand, basically. And I remember this young girl excited to see her father, uncle, and great granddad, basically. And she comes through with her Barbie doll in her hand, and she extends her hand out to be wanded. And this is a baby, right? Couldn't be no older than 5, 6, baby. For this baby to have come to this prison and assume the position and know the routine, are we setting these kids up for the greatest opportunities that they have to impact this world? Or are we desensitizing them to accept that they may become their family's replacements in prison? When I started to see this, when I started to see the prison fill up with all of these young Black men, and I would see my mom on a visit with those wrinkles and creases of anguish, I told myself that I couldn't just walk away and act like it didn't happen. I couldn't. I had a moral compass that was spinning all over the place, but this main direction was to never let what happened to me be forgotten and for nothing.
I always say this at the end of the show. I always ask, like, how can people help if they hear about your story? Some nominally optimistic thing for people to sort of connect to. And they can obviously, get your book, which is wonderful. And they can obviously, donate to Life After Justice. But there's somebody listening to this right now who's oblivious to this. who's hearing this kind of story for the first time, who's like, oh my God, wait, it's that bad, it's that bad, black folk, brown folk, whatever. What can they do right now, as soon as this podcast is over, to help in the cause of protecting and exonerating wrongfully incarcerated people? What's the thing that everybody can do?
We have to start in our own backyards, in our own states, in our own counties. What I want folks to do who don't know or don't believe it's this bad, on a Monday, I want you to go to your criminal courthouse and I want you to just sit in the pew in the back. And I want you to see the people who come in and come out the doors of the courtroom. And then I want you to prepare yourself for this November in this election. If there's a name on the ballot when it comes to enforcement, law enforcement, judicial seats, sheriff, DA, do research. Start to collectively get together and link up with folks who are doing like work or who have the knowledge that you seek. We have to start going into the ballot booth and making our votes count, not just for the presidency, but for the local, county, and law enforcement, the judges, the council members, all of them. Right now, what we're watching is the destruction of our bloodline when it comes to young African-American men and how quickly and easily it is for them to lose their lives on these streets. If we can see the cities and states support litigation to go after the opioid crisis in the way in which they're suing pharmaceuticals, then explain to me why we can't start to sue Glock and manufacturers of devices who make these weapons become automatic. Why, Jason, do we have neighborhoods where they barely can afford a good meal, but they have all of the weaponry that you can find over in Afghanistan? So I say to that, please, if you can, donate. If you can't, offer up, your time. If not, please invite me out to spread this message on your platform.
Jarrett Adams is the co-founder of Life After Justice. Man, thank you. This is really moving, and thanks for the work you do. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate it. You have me on anytime. Let's stay connected.
And that's a word for this week. The show's email is aword@slate.com. This episode was produced by Christy Taiwo Makanjula. Ben Richmond is Slate's Senior Director of Podcast Operations. Alicia Montgomery is the Vice President of Slate Audio. Our theme music was produced by Don Will. I'm Jason Johnson. Tune in next week for a word.
When we made our McDonald's Spicy Chicken McNuggets, you were praise hands emoji. Then we ran out, and you were streaming tears emoji. Now they're back, so you can be grinning face with sweat emoji. Order ahead on the McDonald's app.
And get Money Mouth Face emoji with 2 orders of crispy, irresistible 10-piece McNuggets, spicy or classic, for just $6. Limited time only. Prices and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer. Single item at regular price.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.